Well, hello again. Now that we are still at it, we have looked in the previous lesson at what a class is, at what object-oriented programming is. In this second class, we will look at the anatomy of classes, what a PHP class built of, and specifically the Drupal 8 class. And for that, we look at the node module. Now, there are many modules in Drupal. Custom, core, contributed modules. And the object-oriented part comes in the folder, in each module, in the folder called sources, src. So when I see this folder, src, it tells me that in this folder the classes will be located for this module. I open it and I see different types of classes. There are many different types of classes that do different sorts of things. We will not discuss them right now in detail, but we will look at one class that defines the node entity. Here it is. The first thing that you see that it has a very long comment, and this comment, it has data that looks like, like an array, like some kind of data, and that is true. This comment, this kind of comment, is called annotation. It serves to provide data, information about this class, like this class node, and this annotation provides information about the handlers. You see, those are different classes over here, and provides the keys of the entity, of the node entity. It has node ID, node revision, node type or bundle, node label or title, language code, unique UID, and so on, and user ID, whether it's published or not. And all that information is defined in annotation. You will not see annotation in all cases, but in the cases like that, when an entity is defined, this information is passed so that Drupal knows which kind of entity, which keys it has, how to structure its table in the database. So you will know what this stands for, like some links, like this is the page to edit a node, this is a page to delete a node, or everything defined here. Then in annotation, then we have the class declaration itself, class node. So you know that if you will want to perform operations on a node, you will interact with this class. So it's class node, and it extends editorial content entity base. So this means that this class node is based on this class, because classes have inheritance, and we will discuss it later, what is inheritance. But basically, you can take one class and use this class as a starting point for the new class. So this editorial content entity base, I can navigate to it, boom. It's pretty basic, a small class. But this small class uses traits. Traits is basically like a class, but it doesn't have any, it doesn't work independently. Basically, a trait is a bunch of functions. So if you want your class to include some common bunch of functions, you include that trait into it, and it just imports all those functions into your class. And then it's an abstract class. We won't talk a lot about this now, but abstract means that you cannot actually use this class. You must only create a class which inherits this class, and then that other class, the child class, you can use, not this class itself. So it basically says that I am a cookie form. You cannot use me, but you need to create a cookie out of me and then use that cookie. So abstract class cannot be used directly, only its children that inherit. And node inherits, it extends that class. And then what we have inside, a variable. And this variable is public. This means that if I go and check somewhere else in the code, I call this class, I will be able to get this variable. Like public means that it can be accessed from outside of this class. Most functions and most data, most variables are not accessible from outside. They are preserved. They are restricted. And we will talk about that more when we talk about defining methods and properties. But we're looking at the anatomy right now. So there are variables which are called properties when they are in the class, and there are functions. So here's also public function. It means that this function can be called from outside. If some other part of code gets hold of the node, it can call this function pre-save. And are there any private functions? Oh, public. Yeah, these are all public functions. Like they all can be called from outside. But sometimes you want to have private functions or private variables. And what private, like in PHP, there are 3 modifiers of access. Let's talk about them now. They're public, and then they're private, and then there and then there's protected. So what's the difference? The difference is this: public will be accessible from the outside. Private will not be accessible to the outside, and it will also not be accessible for the children that will inherit this class, that will extend this class. Like if I put here a protected function, this class node will not have access to it. I mean private function. If I put a private function here, this child class node will not be able to access it. So private means that it's restricted only to this current class. Child classes will not be able to access it. And then there is a protected. Protected means that protected access modifier means that this variable, or if I put it before function, then this function can be accessed from within this class or from within its children, but not from the outside world. So public access for outside world and inside the class, private access only for inside, only for this class, and protected is like private access only inside this class, but also for its children. If I define a protected function or protected variable here, and then in a child class I can still access it. So that's the difference. Why would you want, like, you can say, what the hell, why this complexity? Why do we have those modifiers of access? And the reason for that is that imagine you have a class that handles security, that handles passwords, that accesses database and checks some security information. And imagine that its variables are all public. They can be easily accessed from outside this class. Then, all it takes is to get hold of some part of the code base, and you can basically go into that class and just get all the secret information. And you don't want that, of course. Another use case, imagine if you have a class, some simple class. Where is that my simple class in AAPP controller? Imagine you have a real simple class with a real simple public function, and it receives some information and then it returns a response. So whatever you have inside, different functionality which handles that response internally, you don't want to expose that, because time will pass and you will have other parts of code which rely on this code. So you must be sure that your interfaces, your APIs, that the information that it receives is consistent and the information that it feeds out is consistent. And so the external functions written by other programmers or even by you don't need to be concerned about what the hell is going inside this function. They just need to make sure that they feed a certain format of information and then they will get response in a certain format. And if you have private variables and private, do we have anything private? Public. Oh, maybe something private here. Public. Oh, here we have protected variables. So we know that they're inside, that other classes and other parts of code cannot access them. They cannot check what is inside and they cannot modify them. So we know that when we construct, we give certain configuration to this to this class, and then it gives out certain responses when asked through the public functions. And now I can know that if I have a standardized input and standardized output, I can count on that. It will be stable. Whatever I do inside, I can change things, I can rework things, but if the input is standard and if the output of the class, of the functions of the class is standard, then nothing will break in other parts of the code. And that's what I want. So I don't want some other module, some other class get inside my class and start modifying those functions, start modifying those variables. Because if they start modifying those variables directly, and later I will need to change those, those workings or structure, to rename variables, to change the format, how data is stored inside those variables. And if those external functions were just getting directly and modifying and feeding on those variables directly, then whatever I change inside will in fact break things elsewhere. And we don't want that. So in order to keep the code secure and in order to keep the code maintainable, we want to limit access to those parts of the functions that are internal. And protected is the limiting factor that I use. Only this class and its children. If it's an abstract function, it has to be protected, because if it's private, and we know that abstract class cannot be created an instance of, it cannot be used directly, then they will not be usable at all. So abstract class, it can be used directly, but it can have children of it created, and they will have those variables only available for those children. And then there are public functions that will be available to access from outside. And then there are protected functions that can only be used by this class and its children. This class will not be able to use them because it cannot be used directly. It's an abstract class. So this is the basic idea. And we have spoken a lot, but you can basically see that a class is a bunch of code grouped under one name, and it has a name, it has variables, it has functions, and variables are called properties and functions are called methods. Functions are called methods. And then they can have different levels of access. Public are the ones that public variables and functions can be accessed from outside, and protected can only be accessed from inside. Okay, we'll look into more things shortly. We'll look into constructors, getters, and setters in the next video. And getters and setters, where's that? Constructors, getters. Yeah, I see that I strayed off the path, but defining methods, defining properties. Yeah, we talked some about inheritance, that one class can inherit another class. So basically, like, we are writing a plugin, and a plugin is a generic class. And then out of this plugin base, we create actual plugins. Class app base extends plugin base. So it is like this class builds upon this class. Okay, goodbye.